In the book of Judges, Shoftim, the Chidah brings a very interesting commentary where he says that when judges are being shofet b'tzedek, they're issuing righteous judgments, they create a yichud elyon, a higher unification, of the name Havaya, which is Hashem's ineffable name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the name, I'll say it once, Adonai, Shem Adnut. I want to explain what this means because it's ridiculously profound. It's ridiculously practical, even though it sounds very Kabbalistic and mystical. But we can demystify it, and here we go. So firstly, what is Hashem's name Havaya supposed to stand for? Because we know that Hashem has got many names. Some of them are holy, you're not allowed to pronounce them, especially that one. In fact, according to the Rambam's halacha, and according to everybody else as well, that name is Hashem's actual name. It's not referring to anything about him per se, apart from the fact that he exists. That's why it has the connotation of he always was, is, and will be, his eternity. But also, it is associated with what is intrinsic to Hashem, if you can say such a thing, which is his compassion. We're going to come back to that in a minute. What does the name Shem Adnut refer to? Well, as we know, that is the name that we call him from our point of view as beings who live in the physical world. It's the name of mastery over nature. He is the master of nature. He creates it. He sustains it. He's in charge. And when you combine that name with Kel, you get the gematria of Tzav, which, as we are taught by the Arizal, means idolatry. In this world of nature, it's possible to believe in idols, la aleinu. And as such, we have this issue, and it's actually very specific, and that's what I want to get to. This is the most important point of this video, because it's talking about the righteous judgments that I was talking about before. So, in this world, we have the natural law, nature. Nature seems to be a system of very, very cold, harsh justice. It's fair. The strongest gets, the weakest does not. That's considered fair, let's say. And that is just a general lesson about justice. Justice in general seems like it is cold, harsh, fair, but certainly not compassionate. Certainly not compassionate. So people look at this natural world with its justice and say, where's Havaya? How can Hashem have anything to do with this? Because surely Hashem is compassionate. Right? When the righteous judges make their judgments, they show that justice itself is compassionate. Not a mistake. For example, a secular judge may sometimes show compassion when he's issuing his judgment. And sometimes we might admire him for that, if it's, a vulnerable single mother or whatever. Or we might get annoyed at him, like, why are you showing compassion to this serial killer? But either way, in either case, we don't say he's being just, we're saying he's being compassionate. He's deviating from justice, because justice and compassionate are two separate topics, two separate issues, two separate systems. Now, did you know that Shem Adnut has the same gematria as Heichal? And that's a reference to the Beit HaMikdash. Because in the Beit HaMikdash was where the Sanhedrin and the righteous judges of Israel sat and issued their judgments. They would judge halacha and they would judge cases. And we have to understand what it is about a righteous judge that can show that justice is compassionate. Not a deviation, not a friend, but actually one and the same. And when we do that, we create a yichud. A yichud is something that we know about from the Kabbalah, and we say it every day, or many of us do anyway. We say L'Shem yichud kudsha b'richu u'shchinatei, and there's a whole, preparatory text that we read before doing many mitzvot and many davenings. So what is a yichud? Let's demystify it right now. For our purposes anyway, a yichud is to do with our perception, the way we view things, our conceptions or our misconceptions. In fact, overcoming a misconception, especially with regards to Hashem's unity, is called a yichud. And in this case, the highest, most lofty of cases, as I said, this is very profound. It's when we see that justice and compassion are not contradictions, they are one and the same. We see that Havaya is Adonai, is the God of nature, as well as the supreme lofty God. We see compassion in the physical world, and we see that it's actually everywhere. So this is achieved best through the tzaddikim who do this. And when we see it, we can then contemplate it, and we can adjust our conceptions and our perception to the point where we see this unity practically, and we contemplate it. And when we contemplate it during our davening, our prayers, it actually creates a mystical response from heaven. A lot of blessing and goodness is channeled to the world because we made Hashem happy, and He rewards us for that, and He rewards the whole world for that. We actually make the world holy directly and practically. Or I'd say indirectly, because our yichud is producing that response from heaven. And it's not just for us, it's for the whole world. It accelerates the Mashiach greatly. So let's see, how does this work? How does this actually work in practice? How do we draw Hashem's name Havaya into the Heichal? Remember the gematria. And remember also that the one place in the world that we actually sometimes pronounce Hashem's name Havaya properly is in the Beit HaMikdash. Otherwise, instead of saying that word, we say Adonai. Okay, so it's all connected. Anyway, let's give an example. One example is by studying Hashem's laws. When we study Hashem's laws, we can sometimes see them as cold and harsh, pure justice without compassion, until we look at how the tzaddikim have taught us what these laws mean and the halachas that are associated with them. So, for example, after Har Sinai, the very first mitzvah that was given to us after the Aseret Hidabroot, the 10 Commandments, is the mitzvot pertaining to slaves. And you're going to say, oh, look, slaves. The Torah is full of slavery. It's just, maybe, but it's not compassionate, is it? Look at the laws. The very first thing Hashem tells us about slaves is that you cannot treat them like trash. You actually cannot even treat them less than you treat yourself. If you've got one bed, only one bed, you have to give it to your slave. And I'm not going to use that word anymore, because slave is a term that's got other connotations now. Like I said in my previous video on Mishpatim, it's got a connotation now that is associated with what the evil nations of the world have been doing. Kidnapping, exploiting, etc. And what the Torah tried to do is introduce the concept into the world, which I believe it succeeded at, is that there is a difference between a someone and a something. And you cannot conflate the two. You cannot treat people like things. Even if you think you own them, even if you think it's fair because you bought them, whatever it is, no such thing. Slaves are people too. And I'd say that is where the compassion is. What is compassion? Let's revisit the term compassion now. The lower form of compassion is basically mercy, rachamim. The typical showing leniency. Maybe it's associated with sympathy or pity or even empathy. However, when we're talking about Shem Havaya, Hashem's great name, we're talking about keter. We're talking about preciousness and value and sacredness. When a person deeply, deeply appreciates the sacredness of human life, especially when it's personal, that human life, that guy there, Shlomi or Rifki, then one is filled with Keter's version of compassion, the Yud Gimel Midot Rachamim, let's say, which is, again, it's not just simple pity, mercy, or leniency. It's the deep, precious valuing of life that permeates a person's neshama to the point where he's obligated to help this person. He's obligated to treat this person nicely, to bring out a smile, to not see this person suffer, and to fight for that. That is real compassion. And that is what you get when you integrate the lesson. There's a difference between a someone and a something. And I'll prove that from, let's say, the Ama Ivriya, which I did in the Mishpatim video. A lot of people think that it's only fair. She's my daughter. If I want to sell her, I can. I made her. I paid for her until now. If I want to sell her, I can. And that's just. It's cold. It's harsh, but it's fair. So the Torah says, no. Look at the laws. Look what the tzaddikim did with these laws. And you can even look at the pasukim themselves, because they imply it very, very clearly. It's not an exploitative abuse of one's children, chas v'shalom. Who are we talking about? We're talking about our holy ancestors who understood holiness more than us, not less. And if we find that abhorrent, certainly they did. They were not selling their daughters for money. Who are we talking about? This is Rivki, his daughter. He's a holy Jewish man is never going to sell his daughter for money. No, the situation is in the times of extreme poverty, in places where women were not allowed to work, and if they didn't have a husband or a father supporting them, they were in grave danger of being sold into actual slavery, or worse, chas v'shalom. Then the father would be able to go to his neighbor, a righteous, rich family that he trusts, and they pay him to take in his daughter and look after her with, hopefully, the expectation that she's going to marry into that family and be set for life. The son, one of the sons, whatever. And she can say no. And if she's mistreated, she goes free. And if she goes free anyway, if she's not going to get married after a certain time, and she's not allowed to be treated like a slave, she has to be treated like a daughter. That's the halacha. Okay? So that's compassion. It's not slavery. It's an ancient, first of its kind, Bronze Age, compassionate, welfare fostering system for vulnerable young girls. There's the compassion. Then you see it. You see that Hashem is here in this law too. Havaya. Want another example? I'll give you another one. Ayin tachat ayin. You look at it. An eye for an eye. Look at what the Chachamim did with that law. It's not taking out somebody else's eye. It means pay for the value of an eye. That's compassionate. Somebody lost an eye. Somebody should pay. But we're not going to start poking out other people's eyes. That's not compassionate. Even if it's just, it's not. That's not Hashem's justice. Hashem's justice is compassion. It's only in service of compassion. I'll give one last example. There's a famous story of King Shlomo. A case came before him. Two women were arguing over which one is the mother of this baby. So King Shlomo said, okay, let's cut the baby in half. You get one half, you get the other half. Classic, raw, cold, harsh justice. What was he really doing? He was evoking the compassion of the mother. And ultimately, she said, no, I don't want the baby cut in half. Give it to her. And that's when he knew that it was her baby. And her compassion was ultimately served by his justice. The tzaddikim, especially the wisest of all the tzaddikim, King Shlomo himself, can demonstrate this principle, this yichud of Havaya and Shem Adnut, better than anybody. But you can do it too. Every time you study Torah and you learn about Hashem's mitzvot and his laws, and you start to see the compassion in them, and you start to perform them, and you feel the compassion in your very being, you're creating a yichud. Every time in your davening, you remember this and you think about this, you bring about a yichud in the world. And soon you will eventually realize that there is not a single place in this dark world of nature that Hashem's bright, exalted, compassionate light of Havaya does not shine. And Be'ezrat Hashem, B'mei B'yameinu, the Mashiach will come, and he will remove this misconception forever. And we will see that Hashem's compassion is divine. Shkoyach.